Hi, and welcome to the Know Who Drives Return podcast at Boardroom Alpha. I'm your host, Joanna Macris, and today we're going to be talking about all things bioplastics. And as part of our ongoing effort to track what's going on in the de-SPAC space, we are very pleased to have with us today Steve Croskrey, CEO of Danimer Scientific. Hello, Stephen, and welcome.
Oh, thank you, Joanna.
Exciting to have you here. So before we dive into the company, let's talk about the problem, right? In terms of, I was just really startled to see the statistics out there in terms of, how little of the plastics that we use in our daily consumption are really biodegradable. So, what is kind of the state of the market now? And I guess what has been the limiting factor to seeing, more biodegradable oriented technologies?
Sure. So, there's about 800 billion pounds of plastic produced every year. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation estimates that about 32% of packaging is finding its way into nature every year. And that's, we're talking, well over 100 billion pounds of plastic every year that they're estimating is going into the ocean, or not necessarily into the ocean, but into nature, which a lot of times ultimately, finds its way into the ocean. So, that's the real problem we're trying to tackle. In terms of the actual bioplastic space, less than 1% of the market is biopolymers. The limiting factor there is kind of, for starters, is that, these are not really traditional commodities at this point that you can just buy on the spot market. They're highly technical sales. Kind of engineered polymers, if you will, and their capital is a constraint in terms of how fast the industry can expand. So I would say that that capital is a limitation right now in that market. Why that market share is less than 1%. Just as an example, we just got started in March of 2020. When we first started shipping commercial product. So, we've only been shipping commercially for 2 years now, and are, still in the very early stages of scaling up ourselves.
Yeah. So the company de-SPAC'd in December 2020. Talk to us a little bit about kind of why the timing was right, why you chose, a SPAC route for your IPO, and a little bit about, that decision-making process.
Sure. So what happened is we bought a used fermentation facility in Kentucky to really jumpstart our ability to become commercial. It's a much shorter route, I guess, because of the amount of capital involved. So we purchased that plant in December of 18 and spent 19 retrofitting it in March of 20. We brought a third of the ultimate capacity online commercially, with a plan to, demonstrate capability and then get financing for phase 2 of that project to bring the remaining 2/3 online. And what happened 2 days after we shipped the first load, it was actually straw resin. 2 days after we shipped the first load of commercial product, the COVID shutdown came. And so if you think back to what it was like in April, May of 20, nobody had any idea what was going to happen. All the restaurants were closed. We were all staying at home, and it was like the zombie apocalypse we were all waiting for. So needless to say, that kind of blew up our tentative plan because we were a small company with limited cash, and we weren't going to take the risk of kind of completing the project or beginning to complete the project and running out of cash before we had kind of resolved what's the ultimate solution, where's this thing going, what's going to happen with the virus, all this. So we went into what I refer to as a hunker down mode, and just operated the piece of the facility that we had brought online without really any attempt to try to scale it up, just operating it at a low level, and then looking for options, while we were, continuing to develop the market to the extent that we could with our customers, because, a lot of the customers at that point in time, had way bigger things to focus on than this new technology. But, we made the best use of the time as we could, and came to the attention of Live Oak, who was a SPAC that was looking for a partner. And, it was just a great fit for us because while we weren't necessarily looking to go public, it was a quicker route to capital than going through a traditional IPO, and ultimately, I think a great way for us to get capital.
So let's try to dive into the technology a bit. As lay people here, this is going to be a
Sure.
bit challenging, but as I understand it, it involves feeding vegetable oil to bacteria. So that just sounds wild, but I'm hoping you're going to tell us more.
Yes, so I can talk in layman's terms. So it's really nature's recycling process. These microorganisms have existed in nature, for millennia, and are constantly kind of recycling carbon. And so when things like leaves, or whether it's a protein or anything like that that's dead, these microorganisms will consume it, and they do that by converting the carbon in the food into another form of carbon for their own metabolic needs. And that carbon is PHA. So when they've had enough to eat, they will continue to eat as long as they can, and they'll store that extra carbon as energy reserve. So I refer to it as bug fat. The scientists don't care for that because it's technically not fat, but it's carbon. But that's how it works. So what we do is replicate that natural process in a fermentation process. We feed vegetable oil to the microorganisms, and to kind of just back up and show you how the recycling works, if you will. Plants capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and we take that carbon in the form of vegetable oil from the plants, feed that to the bacteria. They convert that carbon into PHA, and we extract the PHA from inside the microorganism. And the beauty of it is, I'm looking around to see if I have any here I could show you, but I don't. The PHA from that microorganism is the plastic resin. And so when we make an article out of it, and it inadvertently gets into nature, as soon as it comes into contact with bacteria, that process of being consumed starts, and it all just starts over again, and it will just continue to recirculate, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, relative to, it seems like there are lots of different ways of creating bioplastics, and some involve wood chips and cellulose-based origins. What are the advantages really of PHA? I mean, how can you describe them in terms of either the manufacturing advantages or the biodegradability of PHA?
Yeah, so there would be two advantages from my point of view. The first is the functionality of PHA as compared to other biopolymers. At least the PHA that we're producing has a broader operating range than a lot of other biopolymers, or even a lot of other PHAs. But ultimately, the single biggest advantage or difference is its marine degradability. So most of these other biopolymers on the market would require to find their way into an industrial compost facility in order to break down in the presence of heat and moisture. They really require hydrolysis first in order to allow the monomers to be consumed by microorganisms. Where with PHA, you kind of skip that step. It's bug food, and as soon as it comes into contact with bacteria, it will start to go away. So even in a marine environment, it will degrade.
Yeah, it seems to me a very important distinction, and it's not perhaps factored into the cost of some of the alternative approaches.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know our customers are are mainly focused on helping eliminate plastic waste, and so that's where we stand out.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the company's announced relationships. You have a number of high-profile announcements with Pepsi, Nestle, Bacardi. Let's talk about what are some of the initial applications that your partners are using you for right now.
Sure. So those kind of big high-profile brands are all still in the development stage. We're working with water bottles with Nestle. We're working on a Skittles bag with Mars Wrigley, and now they're looking at other applications as well. We're working on bottles and some other things with Bacardi, and with PepsiCo, we're working on snack food packaging for their Frito-Lay division.
Yeah.
And then we have, on the market today, the main product that's on the market is straws. But we also have quite a few films that are in the development and trial stage that are out in the market, but maybe not being labeled as biodegradable at this point. They're being tested. So
yeah, what do you think? I mean, at a high level, what's going on in terms of the decision-making process at some of these big, consumer packaging companies? What's the thought process, and how do they arrive at the conclusion to start working with companies like you?
Well, a lot of these companies have announced big goals in 2025, 2030. I think when some of these announcements started coming out, they may not have really known what the solution was. So they were, looking for solutions. Obviously, depending on what you're selling, that determines, what will work, for you. So some of these products, like the snack food packaging, do not lend themselves to recycling because the material is so lightweight, and believe it or not, it's highly technical. These chip bags have as many as 7 layers, and so you're dealing with a lot of different components and things. And so ultimately, like I said, our customers are mostly focused on eliminating plastic waste, and that's what makes us a good fit, because these big brands don't want to see their brand name, on a piece of litter floating around in the South Pacific, photographed on the cover of National Geographic. So that's really what they're focused on. But they're also concerned about the impacts of legislation and regulation as more and more countries and municipalities start to kind of crack down on single-use plastics and their use. They don't want to be caught short, because you got to remember, they're not selling plastic; they're selling potato chips or whatever it might be. And so they don't want their product to, their route to market to be disrupted.
Right. I'm thinking, how much, are economics going to play a factor in the decision making, and what your thoughts are?
Yeah, sure. So, economics, of course, play a factor in all of these decisions. What we're focused on are single-use plastics, mostly for packaging, but it could also be for systems, which I'll explain. So if you think about the logic of this, I'll use Pepsi as an example. If their chip bag costs, a penny or 2 to make today, and with our material it costs, 4 or 5 pennies to make, and I know that could get marked up through the value chain, but you can see that if they're selling a bag of chips for $1.89, a few extra pennies on the bag itself is only a couple of percentage point difference, and not as dramatic as if you just compare the price of the resin to polypropylene or polyethylene. And when I say we're focused on those kind of applications, because that's where we add the most value, because that's where the most litter occurs, and the most escape are these lightweight single-use packaging. Now, another example I'll give you of what I refer to, it's not packaging, but it's a system, is a straw. So you think about these companies like Starbucks, who's using our straws now. They aren't selling plastic straws; they're selling coffee or Coke or water, or whatever it is. And at a drive-through, when McDonald's or whatever company hands that drink out the window, the customer wants a straw, right? None of us want to drive around a car, with an open cup or trying to figure out how to drink. So they want that straw. So the straw, even though the straw itself might cost twice as much as a polypropylene straw, when you look at what they're selling and the margins involved, they can pass that along or absorb it.
Yeah. Can you update us a little bit on your manufacturing facilities and what's online and maybe at a high level where we are kind of in the manufacturing cost curve for you and optimization?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start with the cost curve. So we're just in the very, very early stages here, right? We're operating a partially operating we're operating part of a retrofitted facility. And so, right now our cost per pound would be as high as it's ever going to be. So, we're either at the high or the bottom end, or whichever however you're drawing that curve. But that will sort itself out with scale as we model the plant increasing sales. We'll hit a break even, and then ultimately a good profitable level with scale, because a lot of our costs are fixed. As far as where we are with volume, that piece of the plant in Kentucky that we brought online in March of 20 is producing about 10 million pounds of PHA annually. And when we talk about our capacity, we talk in terms of finished product, because that's where our customer gets. So what we have figured out is kind of how to stretch the PHA by adding other things to it. Just one example I use, because it's kind of how we got our start, is we can combine PHA and PLA and make products that are home compostable and even in some cases marine degradable. So that's a great thing for us, because it allows us to sell more product than what we're actually producing in the factory. So our estimate of the capacity from a customer point of view is about 20 million pounds out of that factory today. And I guess we're in the second quarter now. So this quarter we expect to complete phase 2 of that retrofit, which will bring online about another 45 million pounds of finished product for a total of 65 at that facility. We are also working on a greenfield facility in Kentucky or in Georgia that will ultimately produce about 125 million pounds of PHA. And we are also working, we have a second related technology called P3HP that is in the pilot plant stage, but we are negotiating with some major suppliers in the Gulf Coast for a co-location there to build a plant there. That plant would produce about 168 million pounds of P3HP, which is it's in the same family as PHA, but it has less of a not as robust of an operating range, but it has fantastic barrier properties for moisture and oxygen. When we look at, so what we look at doing there is combining these materials to kind of make a killer chip bag. But that's so if you add all those things together, it comes out actually to a bigger number than if you add them up as I stated, because what we are going to do is use some of that P3HP in our existing formulations, which frees up the PHA as the backbone then for additional product, for additional pounds. So at the end of the day, we end up with something like 333 million pounds of finished product and about 60 million pounds of P3HP still available on a standalone basis. So long story, but that's the plan.
But in terms of the 3 polymers, PHA is roughly half the revenues right now, or what does the revenue mix look like between the 3?
Yeah, I think that sounds. I off the top of my head, I don't remember that percentage out of Q4, but it was roughly half, I think. Yes.
Are there meaningful cost or manufacturing differences between the 3 elements?
Yes. So PLA, we just purchased that, so I don't really know their cost structure, but we obviously are just buying it on the market. The PHA would be more expensive at this point. As I mentioned earlier, we have no scale yet, so we're anticipating strong margins, but there has to be volume there to carry the overheads. But I want to spend a little bit of time though focusing on the cost element of the P3HP, which one of the reasons that we acquired that technology is because it can be produced for about half the cost of Nodax, which is our PHA. The reason being that it's made through a catalytic conversion process as opposed to fermentation. Fermentation is just more expensive. It takes longer and requires more energy. So the production cost for P3HP will be about half of PHA, and the CapEx per pound costs to build that facility are about 1/5 of the cost to build a PHA plant. So there's some very attractive economics on that P3HP side, and really what got our interest in the first place. But then as we dug into it and found out about that, it has barrier properties that are, superior to the regular PHA and to PLA, that kind of put us over the top on it.
I'm thinking a little bit about to what extent you might be subject to commodity pressures, just in terms of, we're in a food shortage. I don't know what the cost of canola oil is, but I suspect it's going up. What's your view there?
Yeah, so that's been an issue, mostly driven by increased demand for vegetable oil for biofuels, biodiesel. So we selected canola oil in the first place because it had the best yield in terms of producing PHA, but also it's readily expandable in these northern climates where it's grown. There's plenty of empty land where they can grow more canola oil. So, we chose it because it's a true commodity. And so, yes, the prices have gone up. I think when we started this, we were modeling around like 50 cents a pound. And this last quarter, this was a forecast. I haven't seen an actual result number yet, but I think we were forecasting 59 cents a pound. But the price has gone to about 77 cents right now, as far as on the spot market. What we've done successfully is kind of pick and choose when to lock those prices in. We're able to lock in prices as far as a year out. So if we like the price, we'll lock it in. If we don't like it, we'll wait and kind of play that game. But we are comfortable that in the long term, this is not a strategic concern, because there's already been 4 additional crushing facilities announced to add more capacity, and farmers can grow plenty more. So ultimately this will work itself out. But we also have some levers. We're aggressively looking at alternate sources of feedstock. And if we felt like it was really a long-term issue, we could certainly look at putting in our own crushing facility and take some of that margin out of out of the cost.
That makes sense. I feel like intellectual property is kind of a concern, or it's kind of bandied about in this space. To what extent does the company have kind of a hold over the intellectual property around PHA, and to what extent could competitors begin to enter into the space?
Well, we licensed about 150 patents from Procter & Gamble back in 2007, or we purchased those. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say license them. We purchased them in 2007. And then Renovo, the Renovo product, which is the P3HP, the company's former name was Novamer, that we purchased. They have about 240 patents around that technology off the top of my head. So I think we're looking at a total, patent portfolio of about 390. So we feel like we have a pretty robust intellectual property position there. And I'm sure there are some things that people can figure out what they could take to market, but we are in a pretty good spot, and we have a lot of patents pending that will kind of tighten it up even more.
Mm-hmm. What are kind of next steps and goals for you leading this company, and
good question. So the 2 things that we're really focused on right now are continuing to scale up the plant in Kentucky to demonstrate that we can produce quality product profitably. And at the same time, we're working on what I call an anchor tenant for the Greenfield facility. We're working on a major brand owner to sign up for a significant chunk of that plant. And if we get both those things done, and I should say when we'll get both of those things done, when those things are done, it will allow us to get whatever financing we'll need to get to, continue to build out these facilities.
Yeah. And in terms of just the sales cycle and, conversations with many of these companies, I mean, what does the timeline look like, and how much customization do these companies want from you, and how do those relationships build?
Yeah, so great question. So a lot of times when we first started, we got just kind of bombarded with incoming requests. And we learned the hard way that not every, no matter how exciting the incoming lead might be, it doesn't really matter if the company's not committed to it. And so what we started to do several years ago was, go for these projects that would require a significant amount of development work. We asked the customer to fund that. And you find out right away, it gets rid of the looky-loos, and the people that are serious, that have C-suite commitment, are okay with that, and will have no problem doing that. So we sign with those customers, and we sign a joint development agreement, which we, with milestones and, schedules and all that. And we work through the project with the ultimate goal then of transitioning to a commercial product through a supply agreement. And what we've been doing and will continue to do for a while is insist upon what I call take or pay offtake agreements, because we need those kind of bankable agreements to help us get the financing to finish the construction. Now, I'll tell you that we've been very successful at that. We have over 200 million in offtake agreements. But this is not normal in the industry, right? There normally aren't really contracts like this at all. That if there is a contract between a supplier and a customer for polypropylene or polyethylene, as an example, the contract binds the supplier, not the customer. And so we've really flipped that on its head, which shows the power of what we're doing here, and how much that people want it, that they're willing to do that. So long run, we would probably transition away from those kind of agreements, just because they're more difficult to get in place, and they won't be necessary. We also view those contracts as kind of a starting point, that if a customer signs, let's say they sign a contract that says we're going to buy 10 million, 20 million, 30 million pounds over a 3-year period, we're holding that 4th year for them at that 30 million pound level. We're not going to assume, you would never assume in these kind of programs that they're going to go from 30 to 0. Right. So once they're at that 30 run rate, you can expect that to continue, and then it could develop into kind of what I would call a normal commercial relationship at that point.
And what is roughly kind of the lag between, a design win and then actually getting into production? Yeah.
So some of these projects take several years. We've been working with Pepsi on a funded basis since 2016. Once you get to that point of, kind of looking internally at between the team, the R&D team, the joint R&D team, and saying, okay, this is ready to go. Then it's hard to predict, how long that will be, because then it's kind of up to the customer, the business, the marketing team, timing, when do we want to go? How are we going to do it? And so there's going to be, some lag there as well. But one of the things that we're seeing is, as we gain more experience via doing all these different projects, when a new project comes in, there is less, development required. So it might be a product we've never tried to sell before, but we look at the requirement and we say, well, look, we did this over here, and this has got some similarities. Let's start with that resin and see how it works. So as an example, we've got projects. We have a project with a Genpack who makes a lot of like thermoformed items and like takeout boxes, which is what they're going to launch with us. I think we started with them in 2014, and they're going to launch this year. That cycle obviously has been lengthened because of COVID, but on the positive side, recently, when I mentioned, the concept of systems with a straw, what we're seeing is like QSR customers that are using the straws want lids and cups as well. So we got the request for lids, and for the first time, I think in our history, we were able to produce lids on the first try. So we went to one customer and make sheet. We took that sheet to another customer who punched out the lids. We took them to the customer and they worked. And that's just really, really exciting. As you can imagine, like a 7-week cycle versus a 7-year cycle. So we think that we can continue to compress the development time in other examples as well.
Yeah. And I mean, what are your thoughts on kind of the long game in this market? Like, it feels like there are still a lot of early stage companies. It's a massive growth market. We get it. We don't know. It's too early to get a sense of what the profitability is longer term for a lot of these companies. But does the lowest cost technology win? Or do you think there's going to be a number of different companies with different approaches that remain in the space?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think to how big this market is, 800 billion pounds and growing like 5% a year. So you're talking about 40 billion pounds of growth in a year. If we got 1% share of the growth, the big guys wouldn't even notice you were there, and we would be wildly successful. So those are the kind of dynamics. So we say all the time that there is lots of room here for lots of different solutions. And that's kind of how it will look. Now, maybe in 100 years, it will coalesce around, one particular technology, but, for the next several decades, I don't see that happening.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what do you say to investors who are looking at a number of different stocks in this space? And again, it's difficult for us because we don't really have a sense for what revenue growth looks like over a 3 to 5 year period, or what the real profitability differences could be between companies. I mean, as we do more diligence in this space, kind of what are your recommendations or thoughts on how to make some distinctions between the players here?
Boy, that's a tough question. I'm not sure how to advise an investor of choosing between multiple options there. But I think I would focus on the viability of the technology. Is it proven, for starters? And one of the ways I think that you can kind of look at the credibility of the project is by the strength of the customer contracts and the partners that are have been publicly announced. So I think that's what I would be looking at.
Yeah. I mention this only because the company, like your company, like others, has been the subject of short selling reports.
Sure.
So what do you, what's misunderstood here? And, if you have a chance to kind of set the record straight, or just to communicate, kind of important points that you think are misunderstood, this is a great time.
I don't think anything's really misunderstood when you're talking about the short reports. These people are just intentionally trying to profit at our investors' expense by throwing things up against the wall just to say, well, maybe there's this problem or maybe there's that problem. There isn't one single thing that those shorts identified that was actually a thing. And so I'm very dismissive of the shorts and the short reports. And I think they're, I understand everybody always says, well, there's a place for the shorts, but I'm not seeing it, because all they're doing is damage for no good. They're not creating value. They're destroying value at the expense of others. And I just think it's wrong. I think it ought to be criminal myself. I can't imagine why they can do the things they can do. And yet, as a public company, we have all these rules about what we can say and what we can't say. And I just think it's wrong. And it ought to be fixed.
Fair enough. No, and you're in this for the long game. You're managing a company, not the stock.
That's right. Exactly.
I don't know. Anything else you want to close on? What did we miss? What do you do for fun? What
do I do for fun? Right now at work. So, but I would just say, we are very excited. Our team is very excited. We have a lot of great things in the pipe, and a lot of good things coming down the road. Our core competence is developing formulations and application development, with customers, getting biopolymers to work in the real world. And that's really what we're good about and what we're all about. And so, you're thinking about like the shorts, we just have to keep our heads down and keep doing the job and keep getting it done. And we're going to win. We're going to win. And Phil Van Trump, our CTO, I'll quote him. He says, "We win by winning." And I like that a lot. And I agree with it.
Well, we're super psyched to see sustainable technologies thriving and doing well. So we're going to keep up with what you're doing at Danimer. And Stephen, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. Have a good day.